This video is rated B for you'd better back on out of here if you don't want spoilers, buddy. History is important. With the lessons and building blocks of the past, we create a better future. If only we could remember it all. So today I'm going to begin a series of lessons on our star's known history. I shall say this now. The complete history of our star is one wrought with pain and renewal in a vicious cycle. If you're faint of heart, or would rather learn these things on your own, at your own pace, I wouldn't blame you for turning away right now. For those of you who are still with us, I encourage you to listen close with an open mind and even more open heart. What's discussed today may make you want to cry, you might want to scream, and some have been driven mad by this knowledge. But this is our history, and that cannot be changed. With that, let us start at the beginning, or as close to the beginning of Hydaelyn as I can get. Before the first astral age, there was the first umbral calamity, but even that is a misnomer. The first umbral calamity was not the first tragedy to befall our beloved star. Before the first calamity, there was nothing. Yet, beyond nothing, there was ruin. It was assumed this time before time was an age of gods and wanton creation, but we know better now. Devastation had come to our world, and the price to prevent it was so steep we can still feel the debt to this very day. Zodiark, the first primal, was created to rewrite the story of our world and pull us all back from the brink of annihilation. Indeed, our world was saved, but to some that wasn't enough and the cost too great. Forces were at work to make sure that age of complete destruction would never come again. As such, the second primal, our Mother Crystal, was born, and Hydaelyn had graced the land with her presence. It was with her the desire to keep Zodiark in check and maintain the harmony of our world was given. And then it happened. The Sundering.
That light split the world, and every life upon it!
After the Sundering was made final, Hydaelyn had divided our world into the source and its 13 reflections in an attempt to keep the peace. But like a wounded animal, everyone and everything simply laid in a stupor. The world and all life had been divided into 14 pieces, making all of creation a mere fraction of what it once was. As such, there was nothing. During this blank era, there is no evidence of change or advancement, just ignorant existence, living, dying, and only to be reborn again from the life stream, and so it went on. From this broken world, 3 entities that avoided the Sundering and maintained all of their power rose up. These people would become what we know as Ascians, and they wished to see our world restored by returning all 13 reflections to the source, making our fractured existence whole once again. In their haste, they failed with the 13th reflection, and the shard warped itself beyond recognition and became the realm we now call the Void, with all the souls and creatures within it becoming void-sent. One of the 13 shards had been spoiled, and only 12 reflections were left to experiment with. But this failure was something to learn from, and the Ascians eventually tried a second time. In this attempt, they succeeded, and rejoined the 5th shard to the source. Everyone and everything on the 5th reflection died as their world ended, and all that essence went back to where it originally came from. In so doing, the disturbing calm over our world was ended, and the first umbral calamity had come, the calamity of wind. No documentation of this calamity exists, since nothing remembered how to write it down or record it. It's by process of elimination that we declare this the first elemental calamity, since the 5 other elements are documented and accounted for. In truth, the Mughals of Mogholm have stated that their ancestors existed since those times, and have stories of an age that match the description of a wind-based calamity. An age where tornadoes and hurricanes were the norm, and the sky held no mercy for anything on our world. As the calamity subsided, the world breathed a new air of strength from one of its shards having been returned. As such, the first umbral calamity became the first astral era. From here on, I'll attempt to illustrate a timeline for you, but know this is based on current knowledge and is subject to change if new data is presented. If there is information I seem to miss, please forgive me. I am only one humble scribe after all. But to understand the complete timeline, we need to acknowledge that each age has its own time frame. Every umbral calamity is considered year 0, and the beginning of every astral era is considered year 1. So, with the calamity of wind coming to a close, year 1 of the first astral era had truly begun, as well as current history as we know it. Yet, with no consistent calendars or records to go by, we don't know for certain how long the first astral era lasted. Histories of a Star, Verse 1. Through raging storms across the fields, hurricane winds would make men yield. 'Twas the first of many times come and past, yet valiant souls might seem to last. The first astral era is known as the Time of Stone and Fire. Whatever the many mortal races were before the Sundering was gone, and all their knowledge along with it. From what little we know, we understand that this was a primitive time, where all races lived as ignorant clans and all that mattered was survival. However, what they did do was leave behind cave paintings and artistic renditions of their era. From these paintings, we can assume there were many creatures that are the ancestors of current monsters, such as winged Corel and giants that towered more than 1,000 yards in height. In fact, a lot of what we know about the first astral era comes from Allegan data vaults. Apparently, they also had historians that were interested in excavating their own history. However, all there was at the start were simple tools made of wood and stone, and eventually the rediscovery of the element known as fire. All races were hunters and gatherers in the beginning, but with better tools came agriculture, and with farming came settlements, until eventually we had the beginnings of civilizations. Within Eorzea, it's theorized that the Elezen were the first to reach this point since there are no other accounts to contradict current records. Be that as it may, farms steadily grew into towns, and once enough of these settlements were created, the first kingdoms were born across the world. What these kingdoms were and how they lived is anyone's guess, since there are no records depicting them, and any structures they built have long since been claimed by the ravages of time. What we do know is that they invested most of their resources into masonry to build early castles and forging to create better weapons and armor. Some suggest there were whispers of early magicians and spellcraft at the time, but there's nothing to truly prove it. It's assumed for a time that once these kingdoms and their borders were created, there was some measure of peace in the world. Some races maintained their hunter-gatherer lifestyle, but began to trade and barter with nearby kingdoms. But as you all know too well, good things can be ended by the overzealous ambitions of a single person. This temporary peace was steadily becoming unstable, as some kingdoms and groups desired to expand their dominion and claim providences around them. Thus, the first wars of these new mortal races were waged. Contrary to what you might think, the population of our world steadily increased during this time, after new lands were conquered and brought to heel under a new ruler. But the violence never ended, and neither did their ambitions. They kept expanding, fighting, pillaging. Some kingdoms gutted mountains for its materials and leveled entire forests for its construction. This rapid, unnecessary growth across the world was steadily tilting it out of balance. And you would be correct in assuming that the ones responsible for encouraging these times of chaos and death were none other than the Ascians. They knew what they were doing now, and hoped beyond hope that these sudden events of bloodletting and natural discord would set the stage for a second rejoining. Eventually, for all the innocent souls just trying to survive in the First Era, they succeeded, and the second umbral calamity, the calamity of lightning, had begun. Good day! Thank you for staying to the end of my lesson. It's my hope that you found something new and interesting in between my ramblings. If you did, consider subscribing and liking this video. Doing that is the easiest way to tell me I'm doing a good job at feeding your thirst for knowledge. If there is a topic you'd love to learn more about that I've yet to cover, let me know in the comments and I'll see where my research takes me. I'd also encourage you to share what you learned here with your friends and adventuring companions, and if they're interested, bring them to the next assembly. I hope to see you and any other curious travelers in the next lecture. Till then, stay safe, my friends.